There is a specific type of person this video is going to be uncomfortable for. Not the person who is struggling, not the person who feels behind. The person who is winning. The person who has gotten sharper, clearer, more precise over the last few years, and has started to notice quietly that the people around them feel further away than they used to. That person is exactly who this video is about. Here is what nobody in this space will tell you. The same process that makes you more intelligent, more strategic, more analytical, more capable of seeing through situations that confuse everyone else, runs a second process underneath it, a shadow process, one that moves in the opposite direction. And if you do not know it exists, it will not announce itself. It will not feel like deterioration. It will feel like clarity. Julius Caesar felt it as clarity on the morning of March 15th, 44 BC. A soothsayer named Spurinna had warned him weeks earlier, not with a feeling, not with a vague premonition, but with a specific date. The Ides of March. Caesar had heard it, acknowledged it, and carried it forward into his daily life the way a confident man carries a warning he has already decided does not apply to him. That morning, walking to the Senate, Caesar passed Spurinna in the street. He did not stop. He did not ask. He simply noted as he walked by that the date had arrived and nothing had happened. A man at the absolute peak of his own certainty, treating a prophecy like a closed case. Spurinna told him the day was not over yet. Caesar walked in anyway. 23 men were waiting. That is not a story about betrayal. Betrayal requires surprise, and Caesar had been warned. What that story is about, what this entire video is about, is the specific process that happens inside a mind when it becomes powerful enough to seal itself shut from the inside. Not weakness, not a lapse in judgment, not corruption. A process so gradual, so indistinguishable from growth, that the man inside it feels, the entire time, like he is getting sharper. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how that process works, and more importantly, whether it is already working in you. Every era has its obsession. Ours is optimization. Sharpen the mind, eliminate bias, build systems that make you more precise, more strategic, more capable of reading a room, a person, a situation, faster than anyone else in it. And there is nothing wrong with that pursuit. The problem is what it leaves out. No one talks about what happens to self-perception as capability increases. It is assumed that clearer thinking produces clearer self-knowledge, that the same analytical tools that help you read the world will automatically help you read yourself. They do not. Under specific conditions, they do the opposite. Two men understood this, from completely different directions, in completely different centuries, and never knew they were describing the same phenomenon. The first was Niccolò Machiavelli, diplomat, political theorist, student of power at the closest possible range. Machiavelli spent decades watching capable men, genuinely capable men, not fools, destroy themselves at the height of their strength. What he observed, recorded in The Prince and the Discourses on Livy, was that the fall almost never came from outside. It came from a specific interior failure, the point at which a man's image of himself diverged from his actual position, and he could no longer tell the difference. The second was Carl Jung, psychiatrist, depth psychologist, the man who spent 50 years mapping the parts of the human mind that the conscious self cannot see. Jung identified something he called the shadow. Not evil, not pathology, but the precise psychological structure that houses everything a person has decided they are not. The traits, the fears, the impulses that contradict the identity they have built and chosen to inhabit. Machiavelli watched the collapse from the outside and recorded its shape. Jung went inside and found the engine. Put them against the same life, Caesar's life, and something becomes visible that neither man could have shown you alone. Machiavelli wrote in The Prince that men judge more by what they see than by what they can verify through direct experience. He was not writing about how to deceive people. He was writing about something more structurally dangerous, that powerful men are uniquely vulnerable to mistaking the image for the reality, precisely because powerful men are uniquely skilled at constructing images. Caesar is the case Machiavelli returns to, and what he identifies in Caesar is not a flaw of character, but a trap that Caesar's own competence built around him, one deliberate decision at a time. Caesar disbanded his personal bodyguard. The signal was clear: a man who fears nothing needs no protection. Caesar held open public audiences, accessible to any citizen, projecting the image of a leader who had nothing to hide. He accepted titles that edged toward the permanent, toward the divine, because each acceptance consolidated something in the minds of the people watching him. Every move was strategically sound in isolation. Every move was also, simultaneously, a move that made honest information harder to receive. Here is what Machiavelli understood that Caesar did not. Every time a man makes himself look more certain, more powerful, more beyond question, he raises the cost of honest conversation in the people around him. Not because those people stop seeing the truth, because the architecture that power builds, the deference, the careful reading of what is welcome, the instinct to protect oneself by protecting the powerful man from what he does not want to hear, makes honesty progressively more dangerous to offer and more comfortable to withhold. By the final years of Caesar's life, the men closest to him were not deceiving him. They were simply doing what people do in sustained proximity to someone who has made it clear, through 100 small signals accumulated over years, that contradiction carries a cost. They were telling him what the situation seemed to call for. Caesar read their agreement as accurate information about his position. That is the predictable mechanical endpoint of a process that begins the moment any capable person becomes more invested in the coherence of their own image than in the accuracy of the information reaching them. The implication for you is precise and uncomfortable. The more capable you appear, the more the people around you will unconsciously protect you from anything that contradicts that appearance. Not out of malice, out of gravity, the natural social physics of being near someone with established authority. And if you are not deliberately, specifically building friction against that gravity, creating conditions under which the uncomfortable truth can actually reach you, you are already inside the same enclosure Caesar built around himself. The difference is that you cannot see the walls yet. Jung observed that everyone carries a shadow, and that the less it finds expression in a person's conscious life, the denser and more autonomous it becomes. To inhabit the persona Caesar had constructed, the indispensable man, the general Rome could not function without, the statesman who stood above the factions that had always torn the republic apart, he had to do something that every person who commits deeply to a powerful identity must do. He had to stop acknowledging the parts of himself that contradicted it, not through a single conscious act of suppression, through the slow, habitual process of simply not looking, of routing attention away from the interior signals that did not fit the picture, of becoming, over time, genuinely unfamiliar with the portions of himself that the persona could not afford to house. The fear of losing control was real, proportionate, legitimate, the kind of fear any man in Caesar's position would carry. But it could not coexist with the image of the man history had chosen. So it went underground. The hunger for authority that had driven him from the beginning, present in him the way it is present in anyone willing to cross a river with an army and bet everything on a single campaign, could not coexist with the self-image of the reluctant servant of the Republic. So it went underground. The paranoia that is the natural psychological companion of holding a position that makes you a permanent target, that went underground too. And underground, Jung tells us, these things do not dissolve. They do not weaken with time or soften with success. They accumulate pressure. They grow more insistent. And when they cannot find expression in the conscious life of the person who has exiled them, they surface through a different mechanism entirely. They project outward onto the people nearby. Caesar's unacknowledged fear of losing control did not become self-awareness, did not become the recognition that his accumulation of power was producing legitimate alarm in the men around him. It became contempt. These men are small. Their resistance is jealousy dressed as principle. They cannot comprehend the scale of what is being built. His unacknowledged hunger for permanent authority did not become honest reckoning. It became righteousness. The situation requires this. Rome requires this. I am the only one capable of what this moment demands. His paranoia did not turn inward, toward the examination of what his own behavior had produced in the people around him. It turned outward, into the systematic, gradual marginalization of anyone who introduced friction, until the circle around him contained only the voices that had learned, through observation, what kind of truth was welcome in his presence. Brutus was not Caesar's enemy. Brutus was Caesar's shadow given human form. The loyal man, the man of genuine Roman virtue, the friend Caesar had trusted with his confidence and elevated with his favor, turned by the mechanics of projection into the instrument of the exact outcome Caesar's deepest, most thoroughly exiled fear had always anticipated. Caesar did not create a betrayer. He created the conditions in which a loyal man had no remaining option except the one Caesar had always been most afraid of. The betrayal was not Brutus's construction. It was Caesar's, assembled unconsciously over years through the precise behaviors that his unacknowledged fears generated in him. The implication for you is this: the qualities that produce your sharpest, most disproportionate reactions in other people are not random irritants. The arrogance in a colleague that makes you genuinely cold. The neediness in someone close to you that produces something closer to contempt than compassion. The dishonesty in another person that you find not just wrong, but somehow personally offensive. The intensity of those reactions carries information, not about the other person, about the portion of yourself that has been exiled, that lives underground, accumulating pressure, surfacing as projection because it has nowhere else to go. The shadow does not require your belief to operate. It only requires your inattention. Machiavelli's concept of virtù, the quality he returned to across his entire body of work, the thing that separated the rulers who lasted from the ones who collapsed, was never simply intelligence or courage or political skill, though it contained all of these. At its core, across every context in which he used the word, virtù described a specific capacity, the ability to perceive the actual situation accurately enough to respond to it as it genuinely is, rather than as past success, accumulated deference, or the internal requirements of a constructed identity have taught a man to expect it to be. It is, at its heart, a perceptual capacity. The ability to keep seeing clearly when everything around you, your position, your reputation, the behavior of the people who need things from you, is systematically distorting the signal. Jung's ideal, the integrated person, the one who had done the interior work he called individuation, was someone who had developed enough honest relationship with their own shadow that their conscious identity was no longer dependent on the exile of inconvenient truths about themselves. Someone who could hold the complete picture of who they were, including the parts that contradicted the preferred image, without those parts being forced underground where they would operate autonomously and destructively. What Machiavelli described as a political and strategic capacity, and what Jung described as a psychological and interior one, are the same condition approached from opposite directions. Both are describing a self that remains permeable to truth, a mind that can receive accurate information about its own position, including uncomfortable, image-contradicting, persona-threatening information without immediately and unconsciously deploying its full sophistication in defense against that information. And here is the thing that neither tradition states plainly, because it is the thing that undermines the premise of almost every self-improvement framework ever constructed. This condition does not develop automatically as a person becomes more capable. It does not arrive as a reward for sustained effort or accumulated achievement. In fact, under the conditions that most capable people operate in, increasing success, increasing deference, increasing investment in the identity that success has built, it moves in the opposite direction. Because every increase in genuine capability is simultaneously an increase in the sophistication of the psychological defenses. The sharper the mind becomes, the more elegant the rationalizations it can construct. The more successful the track record, the more plausible the argument that current judgment requires no serious examination. The stronger the persona, the more thoroughly the shadow is exiled, and the more autonomously and destructively the shadow therefore operates. Caesar's mind, by the final year of his life, was sophisticated enough to receive Spurinna's warning, hold it, assess it against the available evidence on the morning of March 15th, determine that the evidence did not support it, and walk into the Senate, all in the space of a brief street encounter. That was not a failure of his intelligence. That was his intelligence operating at full capacity, in complete service of a persona that could not afford to take the warning seriously, producing a conclusion that felt, from inside the process, like clear-eyed, evidence-based judgment. The genius and the man who can no longer see himself are not two different outcomes available to the same person depending on the choices they make. They are two stages of a single developmental process, and the passage between them generates no alarm, no subjective sense of deterioration, no moment a person could point to afterward and say, that is where it turned. From the inside, it feels like getting sharper. That is precisely what makes it dangerous, not its violence, its invisibility. Here is the part that is genuinely uncomfortable to sit with, the part that most frameworks in this space are structured, whether intentionally or not, to help you avoid. The shadow does not respond to intention. It is not moved by sincerity. It is not neutralized by the quality of the values a person has articulated or the seriousness and consistency with which they hold them. Caesar's intentions were, by every account available, his own writings, the testimony of men who knew him closely, the historical record assembled in the century after his death, oriented towards something he genuinely understood as the restoration of Roman order. He believed this. He acted from it consistently. The belief was not performance, and it was not simple self-deception in any accessible sense. It was a genuine, stable conviction that what he was building served something larger than his own ambition. The shadow operated underneath that conviction without touching it, without disturbing it, without producing any interior signal that the conviction itself was one of the primary mechanisms through which the shadow was doing its work. This is what no framework built on conscious values can fully address. Not because conscious values are without worth, but because of where they are constructed and what they therefore cannot see. A value system is built by the conscious mind. It reflects the identity the conscious mind has chosen to inhabit and defend, which means it is written necessarily in the language of the persona, about the self the persona has decided to be, measured against standards the persona has decided are relevant. The shadow is not a persona problem. It does not operate at the level where conscious values function. It operates beneath that level, in the territory that the construction of the persona has placed outside the range of normal self-examination. You cannot govern the shadow from the outside through principles, however carefully chosen. You cannot manage it through accountability systems, however sincerely maintained. You cannot outthink it, because the thinking itself is one of its primary instruments. The only thing that interrupts its work is direct, sustained, uncomfortable contact with it. Not as a concept, not as an intellectual framework to be understood and filed, but as a living recognition, arrived at slowly, maintained with effort, continuously resisted by the very mind that is trying to achieve it, that the contempt you have been experiencing as discernment, the distance you have been living as focus, the impatience you have been justifying as standards, are not positions you have arrived at through clear thinking. They are the shadow, finding the only exits available to it. That recognition is not an insight you have once. It is not a threshold you cross. It is a practice, unglamorous, unoptimizable, producing nothing that looks like progress by any of the metrics a sharp and capable mind tends to use to evaluate its own development. But it is the only move that would have kept Caesar alive, and it is the only move Caesar never made. Spurinna was not a prophet. He was a man who had watched Caesar carefully enough and for long enough to see the gap, the specific, measurable distance between the persona Caesar had built over 2 decades and the actual vulnerability Caesar could no longer afford within that persona to acknowledge that he carried. He named it, not abstractly, with a date. And Caesar, whose mind was by that point sealed tightly enough that this category of information could no longer find a way in through normal channels, received it the only way a mind in that condition can receive anything that genuinely threatens its coherence. He noted it. He assessed it against the available evidence. He determined it did not apply. He walked forward. The question this video leaves you with is not whether you would have stopped. It is whether you would have known that you were doing the same thing. Whether the people in your life who have watched you closely enough and long enough to see the gap between who you present yourself as and where you are actually exposed, whether those people are still talking to you about the things that matter, or whether something in the way you receive difficult information has made honesty over time too costly to offer and too comfortable to withhold. Because that closing does not happen dramatically. There is no conversation where it becomes official, no moment where you can look back and say, that is when people stopped telling me the truth. It is a slow, quiet narrowing, one exchange at a time, one small signal at a time that contradiction is unwelcome, until the only information consistently reaching you is the information your persona already knows how to use, and the silence where the rest used to be has become so familiar that it no longer registers as silence at all. Caesar's last morning was ordinary. He moved through it with the confidence of a man whose judgment had been validated by everything his immediate world was reflecting back to him. That reflection was the last thing the shadow needed to finish its work. If this video found a gap in the way you see yourself, the next one goes further, into the specific point in the development of any capable person where the persona stops being something they wear and becomes something they cannot remove without feeling like they are disappearing entirely. Most people never examine that moment, which is exactly why it owns them.